Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, where we're going to be discussing the extraordinary attack of the Israeli Air Force at the end of October on Iranian nuclear ambitions. Essentially what we've seen, Simon, is in response to the 1st of October's onslaught by the Iranian regime against Israel, Israel has hit back against a top secret nuclear facility just 20 miles outside of Tehran. Incredible news. We're going to be unpacking it for you this evening. Nice to see you this evening, Simon.
Good to see you as well. Good to see you, Ray. I mean, this story is extraordinary. When I saw it, it was just a small article in the Daily Telegraph as of Friday of last week. And then, as often happens, that what we see is what the media, the mainstream media, give us, because obviously, Official Secrets Act, and is that this information only afterwards comes to light. And the fact that Israel has really dealt a damaging blow to Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions is absolutely extraordinary. So not only did they take out a lot of the air defense systems of the Iranian regime and also a lot of their ballistic missiles and drone production, but they actually targeted a secret nuclear research facility that only the top echelons of the Iranian regime actually knew about. This could have actually taken back the Iranian regime's ambitions for a nuclear breakout years, if not decades, which shows how successful the latest Israeli airstrike on Iran was, dating back to Friday, the 25th of October.
We're going to be asking, is Israel now on the verge of destroying Iranian nuclear ambitions? And will the incoming Trump administration signify the end of the Islamic Iranian regime? And it's an incredible story, Simon, what we see. And at the time, in live time, there was a little bit of question mark. Okay, Israel had apparently responded to the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime downplayed any action that Israel had taken, but very swiftly we've seen a de-escalation on Iran's part, which some perhaps were surprised by. But the truth of it has now begun to come out, that this nuclear weapons research site, so clandestine that very few, even within the heart of the Iranian regime, knew about it, was destroyed by the IAF, destroying most of Iran's air defense systems, making the whole of the nation extremely vulnerable as well to further Israeli airstrikes that could finally destroy once and for all the regime's nuclear weapons.
I mean, it's incredible deterrent capabilities that Israel did. I mean, first of all, people were complaining, particularly the hawks within Israel and the supporters of Israel, that Israel's first strike against the rockets and missiles that are fired by the Iranian regime back in April didn't do much damage, just took out a few air-to-surface missiles. But now we see that this is a more clever strategic strike in response to the 180 ballistic missiles that the Iranian regime fired at Israel back on the 1st of October. So not only now is the Iranian regime vulnerable to future airstrikes against Israel, it shows that the Mossad, Israel's secret service, intelligence agency, has penetrated the very inner circle of the Iranian regime. But it also shows as well that Israel's capabilities of flying over Israeli military aircraft jets to take out Iran's nuclear facilities is more than capable. And the fact is that the Iranian regime spent over $2 billion on its attack on Israel. And of course, what's happened is it's set back its nuclear program. Not saying that the entire nuclear program has been eradicated, because it hasn't, but this is certainly a major key development in preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
Well, not to mention the total devastation of Iran's terror proxy organizations, Hezbollah and Hamas as well, in the past year after the horrific October the 7th attacks. Israel has responded. It has responded, Simon, especially in relation to Hezbollah. It was very lenient at first. It was giving time. It was working on what would seem to be, warnings saying, look, we're going to do this. We're responding to any incursions, but de-escalate now was the continual message of the government in Israel to Hezbollah. And frankly, I believe that Nasrallah and all of Hezbollah's leadership could be alive today had they heeded that warning. But of course they did not, and now we've seen Iran swiftly losing its power across the Middle East.
No, absolutely. And what we see clearly is a complete game changer now, where Israel has a superiority, not only air superiority in the air over Iranian skies, but certainly dealt a deadly blow to their terror proxies, namely Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, it's interesting when we discuss the nation of Israel. Now, one of the prime Israeli foreign policy objectives, certainly military objectives, is to prevent regional powers in the Middle East from developing nuclear weapons. And the state of Israel has a history of preventing our enemies from ever acquiring nuclear weapons.
Well, the German news agency Deutsche Welle reported under the headline how Israel prevents its neighbors from getting nuclear arms. Amid speculation about the possibility of Israel targeting Iranian nuclear sites, here's an overview of how Israel has historically sought to curb the nuclear ambitions of its regional adversaries. The German agency says since its founding in 1948, Israel has been at odds with many of its neighbors, several of whom do not recognize it as a state. The majority of whom do not recognize it as a legitimate state. A major security concern for all Israeli governments is the potential for regional powers to acquire nuclear weapons. Israel itself is widely believed to possess its own nuclear arsenal, but it follows a policy of ambiguity, never officially confirming this. For Israel, the idea of adversaries obtaining nuclear weapons poses an existential threat, as a single nuclear strike could devastate the small nation. And this fear has driven Israel to undertake both covert and overt actions to prevent nuclear development in the region. And it begins talking about Operation Damocles 1962 to 1963, which targeted Egypt's rocket program.
Yeah, and the ex-Nazis were involved in this missile defense system in which the Egyptians under President Nasser were actually developing long-range missiles capable of hitting Tel Aviv. And the fear of the Israeli security services was that if one of these rockets and missiles ever had a nuclear warhead, then this would pose an existential threat to Israel. So let's just unpack a little bit more of this. So it says in the late 1950s and early 1960s, Egypt under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he was the one that launched the Six-Day War against Israel in June 1967, invested heavily in ballistic missiles and jet aircraft programs. In the early 1960s, Cairo enlisted several German scientists, some of those with ties to Nazi Germany, wartime missile programs to help develop long-range rockets at a site known as Factory 333. Although not a nuclear program, the rockets had the potential to carry out radioactive material. And also says that Israel responded by instructing its intelligence agency, the Mossad, to neutralize the German scientists working on the project. The operation involved assassinations, intimidations, and sabotage. And between 1961 and 1963, parcel bombs killed or injured several scientists, while others abandoned their project under threat. The campaign severely hindered the Egyptian missile defense program that they were trying to establish, and therefore Israel was able to deter that threat.
And we have also in Operation Opera 1981, the rise of the Begin Doctrine. On June 7th of 1981, Israel launched a preemptive strike on Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor at a facility near Baghdad, using U.S.-supplied F-15 and F-16 fighter jets. The airstrike killed 10 Iraqi soldiers and a French engineer. Iraq, which was led by Saddam Hussein at the time, an evil dictator responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths in that region, had acquired the reactor from France, claiming it was for peaceful purposes. However, Israeli intelligence believed Iraq intended to use it to develop nuclear weapons. Before the strike in 1979, Israeli operatives sabotaged equipment bound for the reactor at a shipping hangar in the French Riviera. In 1980, several scientists working on Iraq's nuclear program were mysteriously killed. The mission, known as Operation Opera, became a cornerstone of Israeli defense policy, leading to the establishment of what's called the Begin Doctrine, named after Menachem Begin, who ordered the strike during his time as prime minister from 1977 to 1983. The doctrine emphasizes Israel's commitment to preventing hostile states from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Also important to note that had it not been for that Israeli military operation back in June of 1981, then when the first Gulf War occurred, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August of 1990, the Allied forces would be facing a nuclear Saddam and a nuclear Iraq, had it not been for Israel's attack on Osrink back in 81.
And although the strike significantly crippled Iraq's nuclear ambitions, Saddam Hussein would continue to pursue nuclear capabilities and would continue to pursue formulating weapons of mass destruction. However, the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the Gulf War also in the early 90s, and subsequent international sanctions ultimately would prevent Iraq from advancing its program further.
And a more recent action on behalf of the Israeli Air Force was known as Operation Orchard back in 2007, which was halting Syria's bid to become a nuclear power and have nuclear weapons. So Israel launched another covert strike back in 2007, this time targeting a nuclear facility in Syria. Intelligence reports suggested that the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was secretly backing and building a nuclear reactor, and the facility known as Al-Kibar was nearing operational status, raising alarm in Israel. So on the night of the 6th of September 2007, Israeli fighter jets carried out Operation Orchard, a precise bombing mission that destroyed the Al-Kibar reactor. The strike effectively ended Syria's nuclear ambitions and prevented it from producing nuclear weapons. And can you imagine what Syria would be like now had Israel not done so? So the Syrian regime, or the rebels that are fighting this horrific civil war, having the capability of having nuclear weapons would have been horrific.
Well, what's interesting is that Israel only officially recognized that it carried out that strike in 2018, almost 10 years later. But it was a site that was officially investigated by the UN, and they found significant uranium deposits at the site, indicating and providing ample evidence of the development of nuclear weapons, or the attempt to develop nuclear weapons at that particular site. Satellite images showed that Syrian authorities had bulldozed the site, removing debris and constructing a new building to cover up the existence of the reactor that was being used to enrich the uranium.
Okay, so then moving up to date, this is Israel's mission to prevent the Iranian regime from acquiring nuclear weapons. This began really in the 2000s and to the present day. It says in recent years, Israel's primary focus has been shifted to Iran, which has pursued nuclear capabilities for decades. Unlike previous operations, which relied on airstrikes, Israel's campaign against Iran has involved cyber warfare, sabotage, targeted assassinations, and Iran's nuclear program spread across multiple facilities and heavily fortified underground presents a more complex challenge. So as one of the most notable actions was the deployment of Sonics, a virus, a sophisticated weapon believed to be a joint Israeli-US operation in 2010. The virus infiltrated the Iran's Natanz nuclear facility, damaging centrifuges used for uranium enrichment. Sonics caused the centrifuges to malfunction, leading to the destruction of about 1,000 units, and covered that story back on Revelation TV back in 2010.
And although Israel has never officially claimed responsibility for the cyber attack, multiple sources reported it as collaboration between the U.S. and Israel. What's interesting in quite a few of these stories, Simon, though, is that there's a recognition that the security of the nation and the security really of the world matters more than political point scoring or national defense plaudits. You know, they're not presenting themselves as, they're not taking the glory for these particular attacks. They literally are steered at defending Israel's people?
Because the Jewish people know that they went through the Holocaust and over 6 million precious Jewish lives were murdered on an industrial scale by the Nazis, and they vowed never ever again. And the Jewish people have their own state, and they know that the prime objective of the State of Israel is to protect their Jewish and Arab citizens, and also to prevent another genocide taking place against the Jewish people. We had a small scale of that back on October the 7th. But going back to some of Israel's alleged operations in Iran, we also see that for over the years, it says several Iranian nuclear scientists have been assassinated, with the highest profile case being the killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh back in 2020, widely considered the architect of Iran's nuclear program. Fakhrizadeh was killed in an attack that many believe was orchestrated by the Mossad, as other operations, as Israel has neither confirmed nor denied involvement. And of course, we covered this topic in the early days of Behind the Headlines back in 2020. So
it was one of the very first Behind the Headlines that we did together. So it's fantastic. And this just goes to show that this is a story that has been developing. And so many of these topics that we cover on Behind the Headlines, we revisit because the story continues to develop in some particular way. And the threat of the Iranian nuclear program has been quite immense on Israel. And now we're beginning to see some of those predictions, some of those elements of thought that we presented to viewers over the years actually come to fruition.
No, absolutely. So let's have a look a bit more about this actual attack. So the attack on Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was widely attributed to the Israeli intelligence, was a significant blow to Iran's nuclear program. In addition to assassinations, several explosions and an instance at the Iranian nuclear sites, including the 2020 blast at the Natanz enrichment facility, has been attributed to Israeli sabotage. While Israel has not officially taken responsibility for these incidents, they align with its broader strategy of using unconventional means to hinder Iran's nuclear development. And the Sunday Times reported recently that one such attack on Natanz nuclear facility involved smuggling a desk inside the nuclear plant laden with explosives, which took out the Natanz nuclear reactor. We also see that the Israeli Prime Minister has been at the forefront of pushing back Iran's nuclear ambitions to become a nuclear power and to threaten Israel with nuclear weapons. So let's have a look at this excellent video produced by our friends at the Israeli Foreign Ministry, warning of the dangers that Iran poses to Israel and the region.
What connects a drone strike in Ukraine, a bomb in Buenos Aires and rockets targeting Tel Aviv? One regime, one web of terror, Iran. Its tactics differ, but the aim is the same: to spread fear and chaos across borders, from the skies over Ukraine to the streets of Tel Aviv. Iranian-backed proxies like Hezbollah and militias in Iraq extend the reach of terror beyond the Middle East. Even in South America, Iran's terror network has struck, targeting Jewish communities with deadly force. This is no coincidence, it's a strategy, a network of terror targeting innocents across the globe. It's time to dismantle the web and confront the regime behind it.
So let's see this CBN news report that tells us how the US and Israel are preparing further strikes against the Iranian regime to dent its ambitions to develop nuclear weapons.
Saturday, Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei ramped up his threats against Israel and the United States.
The enemies, be it the Zionist regime or the United States of America, will definitely receive a crushing response in return for what they are doing against the Iranian nation and the resistance front.
An Iranian official also warned Iran may reconsider its nuclear doctrine if it faces an existential threat. He claims Iran has the ability to produce nuclear weapons, but is restrained by an Islamic ruling by the supreme leader. The Iranian threats follow Israel's attack in October that damaged Iran's ballistic missile production and destroyed much of its air defenses. That attack in response to Iran launching more than 180 ballistic missiles at Israel. The U.S. and Israel are making preparations. The U.S. CENTCOM commander meeting with Israeli military officials and visiting a U.S. defense battery sent here to bolster Israel's air defenses. The Pentagon also announcing it sent B-52s to the region. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told IDF troops Israel is fighting Iran on multiple fronts, from Gaza to Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. And on the border with Lebanon, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu laid out the goals for its war with Hezbollah.
With or without an agreement, the key to restoring the calm and security in the north, the key to returning our residents in the north safely to their homes is, first of all, to push Hezbollah beyond the Litani. Second is to strike at any attempt to rearm itself. Third is to respond vigorously to any action against us. Simply put, enforcement, 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 and cutting off Hezbollah's pipeline from Iran through Syria.
The IDF says it's in a higher state of alert as it anticipates an attack from Iran or its proxies.
Looking forward, I say this to you, we are highly prepared across all fronts.
Iran is threatening both Israel and the United States. Iranian demonstrators are chanting death to Israel and death to America as they wave signs reading, "We'll trample America." Iran's supreme leader says forces are moving into position to attack.
Thanks to Allah, the officials are already busy doing that.
To prevent a direct Israeli counterattack on Iran itself, the Islamic regime may use its militias in Iraq. Iran's proxies in Iraq have launched a number of suicide drones against Israel in the last few days. Even while facing imminent attack and fighting a war on multiple fronts,
it's always interesting to me, Simon, to see the distorted narrative and perspective of the Iranian regime and its proxies being thrashed in the conflicts that are abounding at the moment, and still trying to portray victory and supremacy. And no one's buying it. The Iranian populace is not buying it. There's just a continued extreme disapproval of the regime, but it still wants to put up this strong front, even as it's crumbling.
Because it knows that policy has worked for decades.
Yeah.
Ever since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, and the Iranian regime has always had a bark that is actually
worse than its bite.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for filling in my words there. And I suddenly lost them for a moment. But yeah, absolutely. So proving to be an absolute paper tiger.
It's promised annihilation. Remember when we covered a few years ago the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, and there was this mass production of, and it was like a theatrical production of the Iranian parliament gathered together, and they were there chanting "Death to America, death to America," and all of this. Nothing's ever happened. Nothing has ever happened. How many years have we heard expert testimony on how Iran is only weeks or 10 days or however long away from a nuclear capability and enrichment completely, and yet there's so much that's presented out there. Yes, a lot of severe stuff. Nothing ever has really materialized, has it?
Well, that's thanks probably to Israeli ingenuity, the brilliant work of the Israeli Mossad and the Israeli government in preventing that. I mean, don't forget that this regime has threatened to wipe Israel off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
They want nuclear weapons for two reasons. The first reason, if they have nuclear weapons, they know that they cannot be attacked. They know if they have nuclear weapons, their regime will be preserved, pretty much like China, and won't expect a kind of Western retaliation. It also means that they can continue to support their terror proxies around the world without a fear of retaliation. But also the more dangerous elements within the regime, the Hochetirs actually believe by firing nuclear weapons at Israel that they can bring about the swift return of the 12th Imam, or the Islamic Shia Mahdi, the Messiah, and bring about his return so that the Shia can dominate the world, which is very, very scary. Shia Islamist theology.
Well, let's unpack this incredible story of the IAF destroying the secret Iranian nuclear weapons research facility. The Daily Telegraph reported only on Friday, the 15th of November, under the headline, "Israel destroyed secret Iranian nuclear weapons research facility," that satellite imagery shows the Teleghan 2 site reduced to 2 piles of rubble by the Israeli strike. A secret Iranian nuclear weapons research facility was destroyed in Israel's attack on the Islamic Republic last month, according to U.S. and Israeli sources. Satellite imagery showed the Taleghan 2 site was reduced to 2 piles of rubble by Israel's October the 25th strikes, with U.S. officials saying the facility 20 miles east of Tehran was being used to design the explosive mechanism needed to detonate a nuclear bomb. The Israeli strikes also destroyed 3 other nearby buildings that were being used to mix solid fuel for ballistic missiles, the Institute for Science and International Security said. Teleghan 2, which is part of the larger Parkhin military complex, was previously reported to have been closed down in 2003. But U.S. intelligence from earlier this year detected Iranian scientists conducting research at the facility, laying the ground for production of a nuclear weapon.
Absolutely, and the Anox news agency also published an article under the headline, "Scoop, Israel destroyed active nuclear research facility in Iran, officials say." So the facility was part of the Iranian Ahmad nuclear weapons program until Iran halted its military nuclear weapons program in 2003 in response to the Iraq war and the removal of Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, as they feared that they would be next. It was used for testing explosives needed to set off a nuclear device, according to the Washington, D.C. based Institute for Science and International Security. The Annex report also said that Israeli officials said the site was destroyed, had sophisticated equipment used to design the plastic explosives that surrounded uranium in a nuclear device and that are needed to detonate it.
They report that both Israeli and U.S. intelligence began detecting research activity at Parkhin earlier this year, including Iranian scientists considering conducting computer modeling, metallurgy, and explosive research that could be used for a nuclear weapon. It's so important that we recognize just how significant this operation was, Simon. We're talking about a secret nuclear research facility, so clandestine that many in the higher echelon, even of the Iranian regime, did not even actually know this was going on. And it's really of no surprise, because how often do we hear borderline comedic, darkly comedic stories of mass infiltration? You know, I'm reminded of how Mossad has infiltrated on multiple occasions, and it just brings to nothing the plans of the Iranian regime.
But also we know that this is the God of Israel behind this.
100%.
He who watches over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. So they do have that kind of divine insight, I think, the Lord gives the kind of Mossad, the Israeli government, to carry out their effective program to prevent their enemies from developing weapons that would seek their destruction. But also, I think, added to this, if any of you have seen the Apple TV series Tehran, then there's an excellent example of the Mossad penetration deep into the heart of the Iranian regime and how they can't trust them, but it comes out so well. But we also see that the Jewish News Syndicate also covered this story under the headline, Israel destroyed top secret Iranian nuclear weapons site. It says on one unnamed US official, quoted in the report, said the Iranians conducted scientific activity that could lay the ground for the production of a nuclear weapon. It was a top secret thing. A small part of the Iranian government knew about this, but most of the Iranian government didn't. The report cited a US official as saying the following: the strike was not so subtle message that the Israelis have significant insight into the Iranian system when it comes to things that are being kept top secret and are known to a very small group of people in the Iranian government. This means that the Israeli security forces have penetrated the very heart of the Iranian regime, and also that there are military satellites that are conveying critical information regarding Iran's development regarding their nuclear weapons program. So let's go and have a look at this report about how Israel's could carry out a further strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, preventing Iran ever getting the nuclear bomb.
Speaking to the Knesset, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. He stated, stopping the Iranian nuclear program is at the forefront of our minds. Netanyahu says Israel proved it can target Iran's nuclear facilities after Israeli jets easily wiped out Iran's ballistic missile production.
These are industrial death factories on an industrial scale, and we dealt them with a real blow.
In last weekend's attack on Iran, Israel avoided bombing the Islamic regime's nuclear facilities, but their ambassador to the United Nations says that may not be the case next time.
To Iran's leaders, take this as a warning. Israel has shown restraint, but from here on, you will see only strength. Any further aggression will be met with consequences that are swift, painful, and decisive.
Meanwhile, Iran threatens to retaliate.
We will use all tools available for a decisive and effective response to the Zionist regime's aggression.
If that happens, the U.S. is pledging to defend Israel from the Islamic regime.
Today, the United States' message for Israel remains clear. We will always help secure its people and territory from Iran and its terrorist proxies and partners.
And our special guest for this week's edition of Behind the Headlines is joining us from Israel. His name is Stefan Silva. Not only is he a messianic leader in Israel, but he's also an IDF reservist. Stefan, warm welcome to Behind the Headlines.
Thank you, Simon. It's great to be with you guys again.
And share with us your thoughts on what I can only describe as an extraordinary mission carried out by the Israeli Air Force back on Friday, the 25th of October, in response to the Iranian regime firing 180 ballistic rockets at Israel.
Yeah, so we're going back almost a month now since the strike took place. This was the second strike that Israel carried out against Iran. The first one was back in April, and that was in response to Iran's first open attack against Israel. I think this strike was highly anticipated by the Israeli public, along with other nations and governments around the globe, because Israel had warned Iran very clearly this time that if Iran strikes Israel again, the response will be much more significant than what it was last time. Because of various factors and issues, I assume that had to do also with the Israeli Air Force and preparations here in Israel, and also with some international incidents that occurred around the time that the attack was being planned. Namely, there was the leaking of some classified Pentagon documents by a pro-Iranian official at the Pentagon, which revealed some of the preparations that were taking place for the strike. Then it took a little bit longer than expected, so it took several weeks until the attack actually took place. So that, I think, elevated the expectation for this strike. And then, after it occurred, then it occurred, during the night. We all woke up in the morning to find out that the IAF had hit Iran. And then after that, it took a few more days for the information about the targets that were hit to start flowing. And then it was very clear for everyone, besides what our officials were telling us here, that it was a significant attack. But then looking at the targets that were hit, it was very clear that it was a very significant attack that set the Iranian back a number of years, if not decades, both in their drone and in their ballistic missile programs, and also hurt their nuclear advancement, as it has been recently revealed. So definitely a very significant strike.
Stefan, Israel has been involved in counter-nuclear breakout measures against nations like Iraq under Saddam Hussein in 1981, Syria in 2008, and now the Islamic Republic of Iran. Outline for us how the nation of Israel since 1948 has sought to protect its populace from its enemy's nuclear breakout.
So Israel's war doctrine is comprised of four main components. The first is forewarning, which speaks to advance notice about the enemy's plans and intents and actions. The second is decisiveness, which speaks to victory and to really seeing immediate outcome to action taken in the field. The third is deterrence, which is a culmination of the previous two, and then that ultimately leads also to defensiveness, meaning to defending the nation of Israel. So I think it's quite clear how these four components work together, both in, Reagan, what you referred to in Operation Opera in 1981 in Iraq, and then Operation Orchard in 2007 in Syria, when the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, took out nuclear facilities, one that was being built by Iraq, the second that was being built by Syria. So the intel here was supplied about the existence of these sites, and that ultimately gave the forewarning about these sites and the intent to develop nuclear weapons. Then decisive action was taken in both cases to eliminate them, and both of those nuclear facilities were completely destroyed. And that led to a deterrence, ultimately defending Israel from nuclear threat coming from hostile nations. And I believe that the same approach is being utilized against Iran right now and in the previous years. The situation is a little bit more delicate. It's a little bit more complex. The Iranian regime are taking a little bit longer. They're a little bit slower in getting the message.
And Stefan, I have quite a technical question, so I'm going to read my question out to you. It says, tell us your thoughts on the successful mission of the Israeli Air Force to take out a secret nuclear research center. According to both US and Israeli security officials, say that the Iranian scientists were working on sophisticated equipment that was used to design the plastic explosives that surround uranium in a nuclear device and needed to detonate it.
Yeah, so the site being spoken about is in Parchin, which is located about 30 kilometers east of Tehran. And that was one of the sites that was attacked on October 25th by the Israeli Air Force. The same site also had an incident, quote unquote, back in May of 2002 when an Iranian scientist was killed. And that was, allocated to Israel according to foreign sources. But the reports do indicate that this specific facility that was attacked was clandestinely developing explosive mechanisms that are required in order to detonate or cause a nuclear blast. And all of that, it was unbeknown to most of the Iranian officials in the government, and definitely not to the international atomic agencies, which are trying to keep a close eye on Iran and on their nuclear program, and obviously didn't know about what was taking place in this facility. Besides the attack on this specific facility, there are other sites that were hit, sites that develop ballistic missiles and suicide drone components, and I guess all of these together severely harmed Iran's production capabilities for these different weapons that were actually used against Israel on their attack against us a few weeks before that. And so along with Israel striking this specific nuclear development site, or a site that is connected with nuclear development at Parchin, and the significant air defense systems that were also attacked and hit and severely crippled, I think all of those together send a very, very clear message to Tehran and to the Iranian regime that they should think twice about any future strikes against Israel.
Reports say that the secret nuclear research facility is located less than 20 miles outside of Tehran, and it was only known to a few leading members of the Iranian regime, the vast majority not even knowing about it. Share with us what this means in terms of Israel penetrating the regime's inner circle and the distrust that this will doubtless have created among its leadership.
Yeah, so the regime in Tehran is very worried about Israeli intelligence penetrations, and rightfully so. They should be worried. They have a lot to be worried about. Several years ago, Tehran founded a special intelligence unit to combat and expose the Mossad operations that were taking place in Iran, 2016, 17, 18, and all the way into the early 2020s. A few years later, in 2018, I believe it was, there was the big nuclear archives that was stolen right from under the Iranians' noses in the heart of Tehran. And it was actually the former Iranian president, Ahmadinejad, who recently revealed on an interview on Turkish television that it was later discovered in 2021 that the commander of this intelligence unit that was founded to combat the Mossad's operations in and against Iran was actually himself a Mossad agent, along with 20 other senior officers in the unit. They were all Mossad agents. And so, Iran are very worried. They're very suspicious, I think, amongst themselves. That serves Israel's purposes very well. Recently, there has been a question about Ismail Ka'ani, the Quds Force general who disappeared for several weeks, and then he appeared, and then he disappeared again. There were questions about him. So yeah, I think in Tehran they're very worried. They're panicking. They don't know what Israel knows or what Israel is listening in on, and so they have a lot of reasons to be worried, because the level of penetration into the Iranian intelligence and into the Iranian government levels is very, very high. I think that is the assumption, and that was the case also with Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies that are attempting to harm Israel.
And Stefan, that sounds exactly everything out of the excellent Apple TV drama called Tehran. And if any of our viewers have watched that series on Apple, it gives a real indication of the Israeli penetration, particularly by the Mossad, of the Iranian regime. Share with us your thoughts on now the fact that the Israeli security officials are actually saying that virtually most of the Iranian air defense missile system is actually being taken out, and they are now vulnerable to attack. Does this mean that Israel is now in a position to completely destroy Iran's nuclear facilities? And also, what impact do you think that the Trump administration will have on Iran, knowing that we no longer have to deal with Biden and the Democrats?
Yeah, so I definitely believe that Israel is in a much better position than what it was to to completely take out and destroy all of or the significant part of Iran's nuclear program. I think that was part of the message that Israel sent Iran. Obviously, within all of these attacks and counterattacks, there are messages that are being sent in terms of the targets chosen. Even the first attack that Israel when Israel struck Iran back in April, that was also sending a message. It was a very smaller scale strike, but it sent a message in terms of the type of targets that were hit, which were also anti-aircraft missile silos. And so here I think the message that Israel sent Iran was, if you attack us again, nothing will stop us from destroying your nuclear and oil facilities, not just the nuclear, but also the oil. And if you remember, in the weeks leading up to the attack, there was a big question, will Israel attack the oil facilities, which are crucial for the economic survival and the survival in general of the Ayatollah regime in Iran. And such a blow to the nuclear facilities, to the oil industry in Iran, would potentially mean the end of that regime in Iran, which is not in a good position internally anyway from various aspects. And so the Iranians obviously need to think long and hard about their next steps. And Trump's re-election just adds to that. He's been quoted as supporting a strike to decimate Iran's nuclear program. And time will tell how exactly that will develop and what kind of impact that will have both on Israel and Iran, on the region in general.
Stefan, we want to thank you so much for joining us today from Israel. It's a reminder, isn't it, that he who keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. And when Israel's enemies come against Israel, then the Lord does really respond in kind. So we thank you so much for what you do. Please send your love, our love to your father David. And thank you for being the light that Israel needs right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Simon and Reagan, and to all the viewers, and shalom from Israel.
What's fascinating, Simon, is that according to the Axios news agency, the White House actually knew about their research activities and privately warned the Iranian regime in direct conversations about the observations made and taken concerning suspicious research activities. And they had hoped this warning would make the Iranians stop. I don't understand why or how they thought that this would make the Iranian regime stop, but the Iranian regime carried on its research and investigations regardless. So when Israel carries out its military response on and it was in direct reaction to the massive Iranian ballistic missile attack on the 1st of October, it cost the Iranian regime, by the way, some $2 billion US. President Biden asked the Israeli Prime Minister, and we remember this, viewers will remember it, not to attack the regime's nuclear facilities in order to not trigger some massive war with Iran.
With the up-and-coming election hanging in the balance.
Oh, exactly. I mean, it was a chaos, really, because he's pleading with Israel not to attack the very thing that could damage not just Israel, but so much of the free world. But it indicated that the U.S. is very well aware of these nuclear facilities, and that they also seemed to be aware to some degree of Israel's awareness even of some of these clandestine spots. But Teleghan, too, technically was not part of Iran's declared nuclear program, so the Iranians would not be able to acknowledge the significance of this attack without admitting they had violated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, what's interesting is, because on both occasions Israel has responded to these horrendous ballistic missile attacks by Iran in this past year, a lot of people have looked at it and thought, wow, those not in the know, those not in the clue, would say, well, it's a bit of a damp squib response. Not particularly, because it's hitting places that are illegal, that Iran cannot acknowledge actually exist in any meaningful way without exposing the depth of their illegal actions.
Well, even including leading members of the Iranian regime knew about it.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it, and it was only kind of the inner circle of the Iranian regime, particularly the Supreme Leader Khamenei, who actually knew about it. So the fact is that they then woke up and then learnt about it. It is the kind of level of mistrust that we're seeing within the regime because of the penetrate of the Mossad into the heart of the Iranian regime, which is incredible. So we also see this excellent report of aerial photographs of the clandestine nuclear research facilities. So the Washington DC-based Institute for Science and Technology published a paper that showed images of the secret nuclear facility just outside Tehran. So they say a recent high-resolution satellite imagery acquired by the Institute shows new construction of Golab Noria, a former nuclear weapons development site used by Iran during the Ahmed nuclear weapons program. They go on to say that the project in the early 2000s and an earlier Institute report from early September of 2024 discussed the reactivated and accelerated activities at this site and another important Ahmed plan, Sabotage.
And while renewed activity could be visually detected at Sanjaran, the earlier study could not find visual evidence of activity at Golab Dareh. This new imagery adds visual credence to the assertion by other sources about renewed activity there. Now, the construction visible in newer commercial satellite imagery consists of new security upgrades in the form of trench excavations, possibly for laying of cabling stretching from a security checkpoint into two explosive storage bunkers and Golab Dareh's explosive fire control bunker. And you can see in figure 1, if indeed for the purpose of cable installation, such cabling would likely be used for security purposes, such as alarms or surveillance cameras. Looking at figure 2, the excavations likely began in late September or early October and extended throughout the month. Figure 3 shows a zoomed in, detailed image of the site and its construction. Renewed activity has raised concerns that the sites could be bringing technical gaps in Iran's nuclear weapons program. And the September report described that the activities at both sites were allegedly being conducted by experts who had participated in Ahmad's weaponization work and are now at the Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research, aka the SPND, which evolved from the Ahmad Plan and still holds many of Ahmad's personal and material assets, widely viewed as the locus of Iranian work on nuclear weaponization.
Which is absolutely extraordinary. So, I mean, to actually show the detailed satellite imagery of this particular site proves that there are activities going on there. And of course, the main aim of the Iranian regime must be thinking now comes in the same time that Israel carried out that audacious attack against the Hezbollah with the walkie-talkie devices and also by the pagers. Obviously, the Iranian regime knew that now the Israelis had fully penetrated Hezbollah and now has the Iranian regime in its sight, and so therefore wanted to massively accelerate Iran's nuclear weapons program.
Yeah, and it's important that we consider that the UN has also responded to this in an investigation, the response of the UN's IAEA, its nuclear watchdog. It's known as the International Atomic Energy Agency. Its Board of Governors are going to be meeting this week and is expected to vote on a censure resolution against Iran for its lack of cooperation with their inspectors. Iran has said it could respond by limiting its cooperation with the IAEA, which should tell you everything that you need to know. As the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi visited Iran last Wednesday and Thursday for the first time since May, and they've warned that Israel should not attack any Iranian nuclear sites.
No, absolutely. Of course, now we find that the Iranian regime is vulnerable to further Israeli airstrikes. So the JNS, Jewish News Syndicate, report that the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has suggested that Israel's nuclear facilities may be a target. It said, Iran is more exposed than ever to strikes on its nuclear facilities. We have the opportunity to achieve our most important goal, to thwart and eliminate the existential threat to the state of Israel. Says that Israel's 2 assaults against Iran's air defense systems this year have left the country vulnerable to future attacks, with all 4 Tehran's Russian-made S-300 surface-to-air missile batteries destroyed, according to the US media. And back on the 19th of April, Israel took out one of the S-300 systems in response to Tehran's first ever direct attack on the Jewish state. And on October the 26th, in response to a second Iranian attack, Israel targeted 20 sites in Iran, destroying the remaining 3. The majority of Iran's air defenses was taken out, according to an Israeli security official quoted on Fox News. So we see here that the Iranian regime is kind of very vulnerable. And I know there was a lot of speculation back with Israel's first strike against the Iranian regime, effectively saying that Israel had a historic opportunity to kind of push back on Iran's nuclear weapons program. And many people were very disappointed that all Israel did was to take out their SAMS aircraft. But then on top of that, we see with the latest strike that Israel has taken out virtually all of Iran's air-to-surface missiles, meaning that Israeli Air Force jets going into Iran now have air superiority without fear of being shot down. And then coupled by the fact is that commentators were saying this is a great time to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. I think Israel's done a lot to do that, but we know that Iran still poses the danger, and we don't know what this regime would do if ever acquired nuclear weapons or had nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it's important to remind viewers and to be reminded that the battle that Israel is involved in here is not against the Iranian people. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that. He has indicated that in multiple direct messages over the years. You know, we've seen how Netanyahu has, even when the Iranian people have been in extreme crisis, where they've had issues with their water supply, even severe drought. Israel has stepped up to the plate and said, look, we care about you. We want to provide this to you. Your regime is saying no. So Netanyahu is repeatedly addressing the Iranian people and assuring and reminding this is not against them, this is against the evil regime that continues to hold them in extreme subjugation, and it's time that extreme subjugation is ended.
But also think about now that come January, you have the inauguration of Donald Trump Mark II presidency, knowing that there are so many hawks put in key positions of power and influence, particularly regarding kind of the US military and also the foreign affairs, and they're no fan of the Iranian regime. The fact that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards actually targeted Donald Trump for assassination during the election campaign, he will be fully aware of that, and maybe this does mark the beginning of the end of the Iranian regime. And if we have a look, for example, over the past 45 years, the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran have had one aim and one aim only, and that has been the total destruction of Israel and the United States and the West. But now it seems that their terror proxies, namely Hamas and Hezbollah, being destroyed. Israel has been very effective in delaying their nuclear weapons program, if not putting that back for a generation. And now we see with the incoming Trump administration, this could mark the beginning of the end of the Iranian regime, because after all, those who bless Israel will be blessed and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And every nation and every empire in world history that has come against the Jewish people of Israel have always been destroyed. Categorically.
I'm reminded of the multiple passages in the prophets that speak of God's wrath against those who would come against Israel. And I think of his coming against Assyria and how he came against the Persian Empire, which of course Iran is the leftover remnant of that. As such, it never ends well. How the entirety of the nation of Edom, located, believe there in southern Jordan, no sign, nothing left. Repeatedly we see those nations evaporate and fall, but the people that God called as people for his own possession remain.
Absolutely. Regan, pleasure doing a program with you, particularly of the topic of this magnitude, and I want to thank you for watching this program at home. Kol hakavod to the Israeli Air Force and the pilots who flew those F-16s who took out Iran's secret nuclear facility, and also to the incredible work being done by the Mossad. Let's keep them in our prayers so that the enemies of Israel can be defeated and that true righteousness can emerge in Israel and the Middle East. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.